This evening, I want to talk about an aspect of the 8 consciousnesses, which is a teaching of the Yogacara tradition, coming down from Asanga, Vasubandhu, the Lankavatara Sutra, Samdhi Nirmachana Sutra, probably 15 or 20 other places. I've talked about this before. So the first 5 sense fields, we all know about those. Sense of touch, sense of taste, sense of smell, hearing, so on. And then the 6th one is just the thinking process. That's the part of the mind. And actually none of this is divided up. We just divide it up so we can talk about it, think about it, reflect on it, focus on it, begin to understand it. The 6th part of the mind, the thinking process, seems to be the area that the conceptualizing goes on, and also that's the part of the consciousness that kind of coordinates the first 5, just so it feels like it's the same person that's smelling is also the person who's seeing. All tied in, of course, to the body-mind complex. So the next one, going up the line, is the 7th, or the klesha mind. Klistamanasvijnana is the fancy Sanskrit word for this, or just crazy mind. Self, me. And then the 8th one, depending on the tradition, depending on the teacher, depending on the interpretation, on who's commenting on it, on who's looking at it, it's variously called another consciousness, the 8th, just to make it easier to discuss. But it's also seen as rather than some area, this storehouse. Alaya Vijnana means storehouse consciousness. Vijnana means consciousness. Alaya means storage, like Himalaya means snow storage. So the 7th consciousness, just for a way of talking about it, seems to be that area of the mind that is busy evaluating, thinking, processing, judging, accepting, rejecting. We all know about that. And there's 4, classically there are 4 ways this is divided up. You could probably reflect on it yourself and divide it up 6 ways. This is a cumulative tradition, so you are welcome. It's not blasphemy or heresy to go in and look at the structure and move it around a little bit, see how you think it works. But whatever you do with it, it should come out of your awareness and not just out of your thinking process and your evaluation, your judgment, or your logic for that matter. Logic is right and wrong. It's correct because it's logical, but it's wrong because it's logical. I know that's very Zen-like to say that, or not. So these 4 particular dynamics are, and there's different ways it's been translated different ways down through the centuries, depending on the country, the tradition of the Yogacara, or mind-only tradition, of which Zen and Chan Buddhism come out of, is the substrate for these traditions. Love of self, self-delusion, so I call it self-reference. If anything happens, it's in reference to this guy, me. And the other one is conceit, self-conceit, or pride of self. And there can be overlaps, so we're just doing this so we can talk about it, but these are are somewhat maybe woven together. There might be times when someone who conventionally isn't particularly prideful, that tends to show up more. Another time when a person isn't particularly infatuated with themselves, but it seems to show up in this particular situation because of what? Causes, conditions, causes and conditions. I'll say it again, causes and conditions. Conditions, the room. So this is the condition of a room. Zendo, temple, monastery, building. And then we have the various conditions that are coming and going within that situation. And then sometimes they turn around and what was a condition becomes a cause. What seems to be very, very important from the position of, you want to call it a position, or from the desire or inspiration to be on a spiritual path rather than just the mundane path. We're all on the mundane path to some extent. If you have a job, you have to make a living. If you don't have a job, then you have to get your mom's help, your dad, or your society, the constructors. Always a really strong relative pushing energy, pulling energy, and shutting down energy. Passion, aggression, and ignorance. These are the three poisons in Buddhism, of the Buddhist teaching. Passion, gimme, 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 I want it, I love it, I need it, I have to have it. Craving, desire, I don't want it, take it away, get rid of it. End its life. Aggression. And the other one, which is the most difficult to see, observe, understand, deal with, which is ignorance. Ignorance is, the simple way is this. What problem? Or maybe not even that. Maybe there isn't even that question. Maybe there's just a shutting down. Maybe there's a distraction or turning away. Sometimes passion and aggression get involved in this, to use those dynamics, and they're the ones that take us away from what we need to look at. What do we need to look at? Well, if you're not on a spiritual path, if you're not inspired to see what is fundamentally true for yourself, this is not a belief situation. The Buddhist teaching is Buddha Dharma, awakened truth. Buddha, awakened Dharma, truth, without credentials, without proof. If you need proof, this is more like a mundane path where you get a credential, you get a PhD. Nothing wrong with PhDs. Nothing wrong with proof, nothing wrong with a driver's license. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that those are used as structures to help us navigate when we find ourselves in a physical form. Because you are not just a physical form. You're not separate from anything. You're not separate from your own physical form, which is coming up and going down over a period of years, or anyone else's physical form. Separated, yes. Separate, no. This is not something to believe. In fact, and in fiction, anything I say, you should neither believe nor disbelieve. Don't do anything with it. But also, don't look away. Don't shut down, don't leave, but don't necessarily buy into it. Don't reject it. Don't do anything with it. And notice the way the mind, you can actually find out about which one of these four might hold sway in your consciousness, in the seventh consciousness. If you just watch the way you handle anything that's moving toward you, the way you handle anything that's moving away from you, and anything that you are feeling like you want to shut down on, or like you would like to distract yourself from. Let's do something else. Forget this Dharma talk. Let's go. Let's grab pizza. I think it's funny. So through the sitting practice of meditation, shikantaza, sitting down, what you were doing a little while ago, sit down, hold still. It's a very simple instruction. There's all kinds of fancy things. You can go on YouTube and you can find all kinds of different ways of doing this. I'm not saying those are wrong. I'm just saying there's a lot of them. And they're all based on, not all, Not all, but some of them are based on opinions. Anything is based on an opinion should be looked at closely, including your own thought patterns. So just sitting down, holding still, and observing what comes and goes in this, in the sense consciousnesses, and including the mind. What's coming and going. Thoughts arise, hang around for a bit, and they fall. They go away, or they come up and they change. If you do anything with them, they tend to hang around because then they kind of think they're important. So when I say just observe what's happening, it takes a while. That's why they call it a practice. It takes a while to fundamentally be present. You just might have to spend a few months, a few years, a few decades seeing how you can't quite be present. That's still awareness practice. It's not about accomplishing anything. If you think it's about accomplishing something, you're going to go in circles. This is called samsara. The only way you go up the mountain is don't accept, don't reject, don't look away. And in this way, you can actually walk on the true spiritual path, which is without result, without motivation, other than we're suffering, we didn't want to suffer. Other than perhaps if you've officially become a Buddhist, in other words, received vows, then you kind of screwed yourself right there, from the ego's point of view, because now you've got to save everybody else. It's hard enough working with this. On the other hand, and on the same hand, you're not separate from anybody. You never were, you never have been, you never will be. Don't take my word for it, find out. Find out. If you find out for yourself, you won't have to ask me, you won't probably even talk to me. Find out what is true for yourself, not a belief system. There's nothing to believe in Buddhism. Not that there aren't Buddhists who believe in Buddhism. Of course there are. There's going to be people who believe stuff. And so I say, don't believe it, don't disbelieve it. Don't do anything with it. Whatever shows up, be totally mystified by it. Ego doesn't like that. Ego doesn't want to be mystified by anything. Being mystified by something means it's got to find out what that is, so that it knows what that is in relationship to me. Is that valuable for me? Should I do it? Should I follow it? Should I? Shouldn't I? Should I do that? Anytime you have a decision to make, this is called ego. One who has transcended the personal self, and it is possible to do that, no longer makes any decisions about anything, because they're no longer weighing things, because they have, with complete clarity, they can see that there's no way you can have all of the evidence for everything, because everything is dependently arisen. So you're only seeing, as they say, the tip of the proverbial. Is it the haystack? No, that's the other one. That's the one with the needle and the iceberg. Yeah. Pardon my metaphors. So this is why it's so powerful for you personally, each one of you. This is your heritage as a human being. You're born into this realm of a mother and a father, dependently arisen. Without the exact mother and the exact father at the exact time, you would not be here. Had to be those two exact people at that exact time. Who synchronized that? Nobody. But since you're here, because of causes and conditions, the causes and conditions that arose from beginningless time until now have provided you, me, us, with this situation and this particular gathering, which is without a past and without a future. So the way way in which we use these four kinds of delusion of self is to just help us go into that. You wouldn't even need. You could just say it's the part of the mind that thinks there's somebody. There's the part of the mind that thinks there's somebody else. Sometimes people actually begin to transcend the belief in a personal self. They actually can see there's nothing, no one here. but they're hooked on everything else out there. They're hooked on other. So it might take some work, or some insistence, or some perseverance, and a whole lot of sincerity about it. And to be talking this way isn't to take anything away from those who are following a theistic path of belief in a certain thing they have to adhere to and have to follow and obey and so on. The people who are doing that are doing exactly what they need to do. We're not here to convert anybody to anything. This is not the right way as opposed to all the other wrong ways. This is a way. And this big ball of dirt in the middle of nowhere rotating around a much larger ball of fire also in the middle of nowhere is also very, very tiny compared to everything that there is physically, not to mention beyond physical. So what's being said, sit down. You don't have to be a Buddhist. If you want to officially be one, I can help you do that. But I'm not here to convince you to do it. I would say don't do anything unless you have to. And in particular, don't receive vows if you don't need to do that. You'll know whether you need to do that or not. But what I do say that it might be a really good idea for you to do is find out who you are. Find out who you are deeply, not just an opinion, not just the cultural description or any kind of description about any kind of naming. Naming is, things arise. This is one of the ways that it talks about in the Lankavatara Sutra, the 5 dharmas. Something arises, we name it, we have thoughts about it, or we add on to that, just like the three own beings of dependent origination, the imaginary nature, and the ultimate nature. So anything that happens, instead of just seeing what it is, see what it is. We make up stuff. We add based on hope and fear and all kinds of things. What do I mean by make friends with yourself? Sit, hold still, and go into whatever's arising, look at it. And if you do it enough, eventually you'll be able to see, it seems to function in layers. It's just a way of talking about it. You eventually get down to the area that you've been hiding out from, avoiding. I almost said howdy doody. But I didn't. I managed to ignore it. Because it wouldn't make any sense. And then you would all think ill of me. Except for Shoshi, he wouldn't think ill of me. So that's what we're doing when we come in. We're not meditating in order to have a good meditation or be peaceful or, I mean, not that meditation wouldn't help you calm down, but what the ultimate reason, you could say, or motivation behind this idea of sitting down, hold still, and see what moves, see what continues to move in the mind, is to clarify this whole situation called the 7th consciousness, the 8th consciousness, the storehouse consciousness. Clarify this so you can see that there is no self anywhere. There's no solid being anywhere. We're not saying there isn't something here. I'm talking, I'm waving my hands around. I have to get up and go eat something later, and then I need to sleep. We're not, so we all do. We have to pay our bills, and we have to do all of that. But the fundamental situation, when the awareness drops way down into the substrate of this reality we call the world, we call sentient beings, we call a lifetime. You realize that lifetimes have been going on without a self, just so far back that the time doesn't even apply. So if you make friends with yourself, what you're really doing is you're learning what it means to be genuine, to not object to your negativity, the negativity that's arising up that we keep trying to meditate ourselves away from, or we try to, whatever, go to our therapist or get rid of that sad, bad feeling, difficulty, depression, all the names that we have. I'm saying, don't separate yourself. Don't miss your life. Don't miss your life. You could say it this way, be depressed. Try that. When I say try it, I'm saying just do whatever's arising. Don't separate yourself from it. If your mind is arising in the form of really difficult emotions or feelings, or maybe anxiety, what does our culture do? It medicates everything. Let's try to cover up the anxiety, cover up. And I have some students who take medication, and I'm not going to argue with them. I trust them. Maybe they need to do that. I don't know what it's like to be them. But I do say occasionally, I say, if you can, take a little hiatus here and there and just kind of see what that's like. It's always about awareness. It's never about getting from here to there. There is no there. There's just this. The illusion that we're so hooked on is just because of the apparent movement, the apparent movement of the physical things in space. It looks like there's such a thing as time. Well, there's some time, not very much. Actually, look at that closely. Find out. Don't believe what I say. Forget everything I say. When you leave, walk out of here deliberately. Just forget the whole thing. Forget. I will. I have no idea what I said. It's very true. If I say, remember that talk you gave the other day about when you talked about how dogs were our best friends? Remember that? I didn't give that talk, did I?
Not that I remember.
Okay.
I remember that.
You would remember it because it's about dogs. But I wouldn't remember. I don't really track things like that very well. You could say, well, or I could say, and I probably should say it's because I'm an old man, so I don't remember stuff. But I've never remembered very well. So let's have some questions about this material, or anything for that matter. Anything about sitting practice, meditation, Buddhism. Yes?
So how can using those four distinctions be helpful to us in our practice?
So you can kind of see, just by looking at your friends or your fellow practitioners or your family or something, you can see the way, which one would probably apply. You know, it's a little bit, they're a little vague. You know, self-delusion, you know, self-love. Self-love is the one where if somebody is just completely fascinated by themselves. You know, we all talk to somebody that, you know, and they can be somebody who's just a wonderful person to be around. You love them, they're wonderful people, but they just really can't quite get over themselves. And they're usually not very unhappy either, because they're just feeling pretty good. Probably wondering why would you meditate? You're gonna turn into a vegetable. That's why I named this house out here Asparagus House. That's the first time I've ever shared that with you. So, and then self-delusion is more of a person who's not sure who they are, and so they're more like looking for a self. They know they are a self, but they're not exactly sure. Everybody know what an Enneagram is? Enneagrams? Yeah. No, I won't use that as. It's very fluctuating. The downside is they're always fluctuating. The upside is they're usually very easy to get along with, because they're never really sure of anything. So they're not too difficult to be around. They have difficulty being with themselves, because it's the other kind of egolessness, the kind where you actually think there's something missing. Actual egolessness, there's nothing missing. It's just empty, and that emptiness manifests as what? Fullness. Why? Not two. You can't find two things anywhere. If you do, let me know how much distance is between them. I'll join you there, because there can't, because there isn't any distance between anything. Distance is something that physicists deal with, and even they're running into trouble. The smaller they get, the more discouraged they get. So pride of self, we all know about that one. Someone who is very confident, kind of puffed up, and just kind of is just, and they might not think that they're prideful, But other people can see where they just seem to be, there's something that kind of oozes out of them that says that they're better than you are. And they wouldn't say that. They would never say that, and they fundamentally don't really think that. But the way they're wiring, the way their seventh consciousness works, has quite a bit of that going on, probably. And then the self-referential one, which is the last one, and there are different ways of talking about this if you're going to Google this or go on Wikipedia or any one of the hundreds of thousands of ways there are of looking things up these days. You would find people talking about this in different ways. There's no right or wrong to it. If something helps you, if it seems to support your understanding and helps you go further into it, it's probably helpful. So I'm not here to make anybody wrong or right. But that particular one is there's an attachment to an identity, to a self, but it feels threatened. So there's a bit of paranoia going on there about, am I under attack? Am I going to get a reward? Am I going to get, what is it, done? Is that the word? Yes.
We work with that type of self-regard where there's that paranoia that arises about what others are thinking about us or the situation.
How do we work with it?
Yes.
Do nothing with it. If you're aware of it, that's the work you need to do. Just be aware. I emphasize that more and more after having done this kind of work for 4+ decades. That seems to be what keeps coming out of this these vocal cords. Awareness seems to be the most important concept that you can keep in front of you. Be aware of what's happening. Whatever rises in the awareness is not near as important as the awareness itself. It's like saying clouds may come and go, but the sky is just a sky. Sometimes you wouldn't know there was a sky unless there were clouds in it. But the mind is like the sky. It's like a blue sky, pink sky, yes.
That paranoia seems like it can really pick up momentum.
More.
And that can be quite painful because you begin to act out of the paranoia.
It can be.
Is there any way to use the awareness to help not get to a point where we're believing in that and taking that out on others or acting out of it?
I don't have a blanket protocol for that, but I would say, other than sit a lot of sitting meditation. And it's hard to do. The downside of a lot of sitting meditation is it's hard to do, and it's boring. But the upside is that's what it feels like to train the mind, to take away all the toys, take away the video games, take away the TV, take away the kitchen utensils, take away the bathroom, well, not forever, for a while, take away everything and sit down and make an artificial situation where you hold still, you look at a very entertaining cottage cheese wall, just observe, hold still, hold your body in a symmetrical, body mind are not separate, they just look, it looks like, because I can drive to the party store, but I can think about what happened at work yesterday and still get to the party store and still think about what happened at work. Just because we can do that doesn't mean they're separate. It just means they're pretty amazing. Because what looks at the mind and what looks at the body, you can't find that. You can't find the witness. But that search will show up. Once you've looked at the mind arising and looked at the body doing what it does, eventually the natural thing that will happen is you'll start to look for a self, for a witness. If you find one, bring him to me. I want to meet him. I have more to say.
Not yet.
I do. I'm about to say it. So I can't give a general, other than sit a lot, and that means that for you, sitting a lot, maybe a half-hour a day may be a lot for you. For someone else might sit 3 or 4 hours a day. That may be not enough for them. They may need to sit, depending on what they're dealing with, they may need to sit more. That's why it seems to be necessary to have the 3 jewels. The Buddha is an example of someone who is awake, someone who is sane, no longer at war with anything. Even if it was no longer at war with war. Would always, if a war comes up, the Buddha will lose. Because the Buddha is not separate from whatever arises. And so therefore, would lose. The other two jewels, of the three jewels, are the Dharma, or the truth that the Buddha taught. Everything is dependently risen. There's not one separate thing anywhere that is, everything gets its identity from everything else. Just like your mom and your dad. You get your identity, your lifetime, from your mom and your dad. They got it from their mom and dad, and it goes on and on. It's kind of obvious, but boy, it's kind of amazing, really. Here we are, and I don't know how I got here. How about you guys? I don't know. I don't remember that. So the Buddha, the Dharma, and then the Sangha is the community of people that come together and kind of rub against each other about these teachings, talk to each other about it, discuss these. That's something we do every day here at noon. Study the Dharma, study one of these texts, the Lankavatara Sutra, the works of Dogen Zenji, the Yogacara teachings, Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings, Gobenjina Roshi, and discuss that material, and that seems to be valuable. But as far as paranoia or some kind of something coming up along the lines of what you're saying, in your situation, just look at it. Which means also look at the fear that comes up over that will be something. It might be something like this, and you can modify this if you feel it's different than this. Something about, I'm afraid I might do something I'll regret. Is that how it feels?
Sometimes.
Can you say something else about what your question refers to?
Just the paranoia of letting people down or disappointing. If I
See,
have
this is just
responsibility.
horse shit. Thank you for the question. Sorry to use fancy Sanskrit words. You know why I say that about it, though? Because there aren't any other people. And you could say, oh yeah, well. But I'm saying you have to start functioning that way, because if you don't, you'll always be doing something in regarding some other person that you're projecting onto.
How do you start functioning that way?
Be responsible for who you are. Stay in your sixth sense fields. Whatever arises, watch it come, watch it go, do nothing with it. In your situation with your partner, just watch your partner's emotions come and go. Do nothing with them. Don't, even if they're blaming you, then be blamed. If they're giving you credit, then be credited. If you, I know you well enough to comment to you directly, I would say that you're very unlikely to disappoint too many people. You're always, pretty much always on top of everything. It's not a compliment, you know that. It's just a description. You have a strong sense of form. You're a monk, so you're here because you want this. You want to train your mind, and you're young. So disappointing people is to actually leave what is arising and go into some kind of prefab idea about getting ahead and getting to be a better person, a more acceptable, kind, loving, nurturing, dependable person. Good question. More?
Thank you.
Good question. Shoshi,
Which one do you have a tendency for?
all of them. How about you?
I'd say likewise.
Okay. Yes.
Are one of these always present until we see that there is no self?
It would be present even after you saw there was no self. Because nothing has to change. Nothing does change. Realization does not change anything. If you think it does, then this is right back to self-centeredness and ego. Good luck. It's not a mundane path where you actually accomplish it. You can't accomplish awakening or realization or enlightenment. You're already enlightened. Everyone here is not separate from the Buddha. I see it. I don't have any doubts about it. It's like Suzuki Roshi said back in the late 60s, monk who came from Japan, died in 1970, and wrote a book called, compilation of his talks called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And he said, he was very funny, he said, everybody, to me, everyone looks like the Buddha until they open their mouth. I don't feel that way. They look like the Buddha even after they open their mouth. They just don't sound like the Buddha.
How helpful is it to identify which of the four delusions are operating in any given situation?
I don't think it's, you have to kind of figure it out. I wouldn't do that, but keep them there, look at them, contemplate them a little bit, not by hammering them down and carrying them around on an index card or something like that, but look at them, reflect on them, see if you could see it show up in others, you know, maybe true, maybe not, maybe your projection, maybe actually seeing. If you can see this with clarity, you can see that with clarity. That's how it works. If you can make friends with this, you have no enemies anywhere anymore. Not that you won't get in a scrap with somebody, that could happen too. You can't, there's no guarantees of anything. Dependent origination has pretty much got us by the ass. As long as you're here and there's a body-mind arising, you may transcend this world. You may be on a spiritual path, but dependent origination is still holds sway as long as there's a body. Just like my teacher Trungpa Rinpoche was an enlightened sage, without a doubt. He was a Mahasiddha, and he got in a car wreck, and then he died of alcohol poisoning. Probably drank, couldn't stop drinking. I don't know what it was like to be him. I don't know if he was even trying to stop. It would be surprised me if he even cared one way or another whether he lived or died. He lived for his students, and when they stopped, gave up on him by giving him more alcohol, that's probably when he died. But they didn't do anything wrong, they just did what he wanted. You know, or like Coben, who died jumping in the water with his daughter who was dying, or was drowning. That's karma. So you're not gonna necessarily be happy. But if you realize what this is, happiness is kind of beside the point. You're more concerned about others, happiness of others. This is a bodhisattva path. You're concerned about the welfare of others. They may not think so because you're not giving them money, because when they come up with their cardboard sign, you aren't digging in your pocket. You might even be saying, go get a job. Or you might say, get better cardboard. Nice, clean, white cardboard with good lettering. Go to a sign shop and get lettering. You might say that. You definitely might say that. Yes.
From Shane in
Yes, Shane.
California. He said, I knew if I hung around long enough, I'd find out the true meaning of asparagus house. And then his question.
I just made that up, by the way. I don't know why I named it that.
His question is, how does looking closer at how self is broken up help us see no self?
I think that's a good question. Why break it down? Because by breaking it down, if we just say the seventh consciousness is the area that thinks that the eighth is a self. That's the area of the consciousness that points in, if you say, where is the self? There, it's in the alaya. But to look at the structure of the seventh itself, here again, just using concepts that may or may not fit, it helps us kind of say, well, sometimes it goes this way, sometimes it's puffing up, sometimes it's not sure that it is a self, other times it's really sure that there's a self, and I'm the one who's accomplishing everything, and the one that everyone loves. And I can see why. I love myself too. I am really good at everything I do. So, what?
You sound like, what's his name?
Like
Number
what's his
49.
name?
Is
What's
it
his name?
45. 45. Oh, 45. You sound like
45? I have no idea what you mean. Yeah. I'm probably one of the best monks you've ever met. Healing. So it would be helpful to look at the parts, and then probably when you stop, it all collapse back into just just that self-centeredness or that grasping at it as somebody or grasping at it in other. Further questions? Sent you.
How do we see that nothing is missing when it's so convincing that something is?
Keep looking at the feeling that something's missing. Keep looking at the delusion. The Buddha did not, as I've said so many times, the Buddha did not awaken to a perfect world where everything was gold-plated and fluffy and beautiful and transcendent and with Mozart playing in the background. What the Buddha awoke to was incredible suffering of the world, the incredible pain and suffering of the world, and the incredible confusion and delusion of all the beings, including himself. He saw his own delusion. When he saw his own delusion, he saw that wasn't separate from all the delusion. And so the seeing of delusion is awakening. You have to actually see the delusion. This is why it's so hard. This is why we sit on that cushion. We start to say, "This, I can't be meditating right if this feels like crap." I like that face, by the way. That was very good. But so that's why we have a teaching. That's why we have a teacher. That's why we have a spiritual path. That's why we have 2,500 years of people gathering together and trying to understand this incredible teaching that the Buddha began talking about several thousand years ago. And here we are. It's as has been said, it's warm hand to warm hand. You have to realize this before you can begin to teach it. You can't just read it out of a book and begin to teach. There are some people who teach Buddhism out of a book, and it's not that it's not important or interesting, but if the students of that, when they get to the point where it's time to jump off the cliff, which is what it feels like to ego, you're probably going to need somebody there who's jumped off the cliff. It's been said, it's like jumping off a cliff. The interesting thing is if you do it, you never land. You never hit. You just fall from now on. Shoshi?
What is jumping off a cliff a metaphor for?
For going further into that darkness that ego does not want to look at, that wants to make excuses about, stay away from, stop meditating, try another path, find another teacher, do something, other kind of meditation. You know, let's do something, let's try something else. This is not working. Anytime you say, this is not working, you should come and talk to me about it. Not just you, but anyone. If you think meditation isn't working. So that's what, further question about that? It feels, with each person it can feel terrifying. It was very frightening for me to interact with both of my teachers. At times, other times it was great, but part of the time it was terrifying because I didn't want to come to an end.
My question is, what was that question you had, Shoshi, that led up to that answer?
Oh, I asked him, what is jumping off a cliff a metaphor for? Sounds funny when you say metaphor for, doesn't it?
It does. It's like metaphor 5.
I never met a 4-4.
You never met at 4
4.
for lunch? Further questions, especially from someone who hadn't asked a question? You got a few minutes left? Yes, goes on.
A while ago, you were talking about feeling bad or depression.
Yeah.
And suggested maybe medications aren't the best thing to cover that up. If you're feeling terrible, what's wrong with taking something to make you feel better?
Nothing wrong with it. No, nothing wrong with it. You could, I mean, I as I said, I have students who have been medicating ever since I met them. I might occasionally say, you know, why don't you check with your therapist or your psychiatrist and see if you can back out of that for a week or 2 weeks. You know, like, you know, Wellbutrin, Prozac, any of those. Sometimes people can't do that. I don't claim to know what somebody's chemical makeup is or what people are going through, so I wouldn't take it away from them. I would just say, don't give the entire thing over to the doctor. They can't even explain what's going on with you. They just know how to cover it up with something. And they might have fancy words for what's happening, but no one really knows. No one really knows for sure what, we all have thoughts, but nobody knows what a thought is. And of course, scientific materialism confines everything to things that they can prove. So therefore, when the consciousness, those who have been working with consciousness for a long time, when they start to see things that more pragmatic people don't, then they want to medicate them. And so they stop seeing spirits or ghosts or all the other kind of things that arise in that way. And I would say don't do anything with any of it. And so I would say maybe if a person's really having difficulty, then maybe they need some medication. Only they would, but they're the ones that need to work with that. And if they're a meditator, then I would say, well, meditate for a while, look at that, contemplate on that, and then if you really need to do it, then of course do that. More?
Yeah, in book study today, we were talking about how a lot of people who have stories of enlightenment went through a very difficult time.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be some kind of catalyst to their awakening. So what's the difference? Why would feeling badly and looking at that be any more conducive than being happy sitting?
Paraphrase yourself. I don't really follow the question. It sounds like you're looking for something that I don't understand.
Is there more potential to wake up to what you need to see if you go into the difficult stuff than if you're feeling pretty good?
Doesn't matter. Feeling good, feeling bad are not separate. Ego thinks that those are separate things, but the example I often give is, what do I usually say? I'll use this door J. So if I move this like this, that's a nerve ending, it feels very nice, but if I dig it into my hand and pull it over there like that, it doesn't feel so good. Same nerve endings, pain and pleasure. And it's a simplistic way of talking about it, I realize that, but look at it in your own mentation, your own matrix of consciousness and thought process, and watch how that works. Watch the next time you feel like you're having difficulty with an emotion. Watch the way that it's very difficult to have any kind of feeling or emotion without labeling it, especially if it's intense or a little threatening. And I would say, insofar as you can, don't do anything with it, don't label it. Experience it. It's like eating food without knowing what it is. You'll know eventually that it's beets. Don't they have a thing where they give somebody, close their eyes and they give them a potato and they give them an apple and they can't tell the difference? Or is that just YouTube? No. Yes, Tammy.
So I don't know if this is so much a question, but the jump off the cliff, you will just keep falling and not land. Can you say anything more about that?
You have a direct question?
I wish I did. Like, okay, so I just,
Like, why don't you land?
like,
I'll help you.
Yes, I feel like, well, I don't want to jump off any cliff because I'm gonna land wrong. But it's very, you know.
Did she say I'm going to land wrong?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I've landed wrong before, you know, it's that,
yeah.
and
Okay,
so I'm just
gotcha.
wondering, you know, how
Yeah,
I
I
don't
hear you.
understand the not landing.
Okay, let's do this. Rather than go into that aspect of it, I can see you do understand it more than you think. So before doing that, let's just continue to sit. Don't jump off any cliff. Not time for you to jump off a cliff. Don't jump off a cliff. Just practice. Jump into the Zendo, sit down on the cushion, hold still, look at the mind. Do that for 4 or 5 years, and then come back and talk to me about cliffs. It's not about looking for a cliff. It's about practicing so that what begins to show up is that kind of reality or that kind of understanding. It's a deep understanding about the nature of things starts to show up, and it's frightening to the self-centeredness because it's starting to get an inkling that there might not be somebody there. And what it is, it's not like there's nobody, it's like there's both. There's both nobody and somebody. That's the thing that is so difficult to deal with because it's called non-duality, Advaita, not two. So you're doing good. Yeah. Just keep sitting. Sit as much as you can. Further questions? Yes. Joshi.
How do you, or how does one observe any one of these? Are they considered kleshas?
Yeah, well, there are the four delusions of self. There's four ways that the self-centeredness, the klesha mind, seem to show up. There's probably a couple dozen more, but these are the traditional ones. Go ahead.
So how does one observe these without completely embodying that delusion or that love or that pride or that regard?
I think that's, you said it right there, that's how it's done. Is you see that you get swamped by it, and then you pull out and you look back and you see it, and then you get swamped by it. And you put, it's a very much a relative situation. It's like coming into the zendo, sitting down, holding still, very good meditation, nothing much happened, kind of boring. The next time you come back, come and sit down, terrible, couldn't sit here, very antsy, all kinds of reasons about why I should get up. I've got laundry to do, I don't want to be here, this is too painful. And then another time, and I could go on, as I'm sure you could also, since you practice a lot. Another time you come in and you just fall asleep all the time. And it's very similar with this kind of a structure. There are times, if you start to fasten on one, suddenly that vanishes and then the other one shows up as being more, holding sway more with you or with someone else. Very difficult to track any of that down. That's the funny thing about concepts that point to any one of the 8 consciousnesses, including the sense consciousnesses. Those are pretty difficult to follow also, especially when you start smelling with your eyes, and you start hearing with your feet. I'm not just being silly. There's a thing that happens eventually with the 5 sense fields, 6 sense fields, that is where the boundaries between them start to open up. So just like the divisions between everything start to open up. They don't disappear. It isn't like your skin goes away and your bones fall out of your body or something like that. It's just that the whole idea of boundary starts to become transparent. More?
Well, how do these reference points or types of ego, or how do they become perfected?
How do they become what?
Perfected.
Eventually it becomes clarified or purified. And so they're no longer in the service of a self. They may still be functioning, they may not. Depends on the karma. But when there's no self, when the self has been seen through, there's no solid being anywhere, everything is still functioning. There's just nobody behind it. There's just smelling, there's no smeller. There's just thinking, there's no thinker. And since there's no thinker, there's no project going on other than to just relate to whatever's arising, coming and going. There's no, the self-interest is gone. More?
Are these 4 types of references to the ego, are they inherently good or bad?
Good and bad is a fabrication of the self-centered mind, of the ego mind. So it doesn't apply.
This isn't exactly a question, but it's difficult not to make the assumption that when we're pointing at these types of the ways in which the ego mind arises, to not assume that they're bad, that they need to be expunged or purified, or even to think that something needs to be purified.
Yeah.
Seems to give it a connotation that it's bad.
Yeah, that does happen. That's why it's necessary to sit to stretch the amount, stretch the awareness as much as possible, so you can see that what arises as good or ill is a concept and is a fabrication based on relative truth and based on grasping and rejecting and shutting down, based on passion, aggression, and based on wanting things to be different than they are. The Four Noble Truths of the Buddha are life is suffering. He didn't say sometimes. And this doesn't make it a nihilistic spiritual path. You have to really study this to understand what it is, instead of jump to some kind of conceptual conclusion about it. Life is suffering. The cause is wanting things to be different than they are. However they are, we want it otherwise. And so, and that can come to an end. Nirodha is the Sanskrit for termination, ending. But what ends is not the suffering. That's a misunderstanding. That's why it's taught as a provisional teaching. What ends is the self and the other. There's no longer a self. There's no longer an other. The suffering is it just occurs. More?
That being the case, what then is purification of this seventh consciousness that we're speaking of? Is it?
You mean a practice of purifying, like a White Tara practice or one of the tantric practices?
Well,
or what?
Becoming so intimately acquainted with these references, these ego references. How is that helpful? Is that a process of purification?
No, it's from the provisional teachings. Of course, it's purifying. We're actually looking at we're purifying, just like the White Tara practice that some people are practicing here. It's a tantric practice, creation, completion. You create an image and you use that image as a meditation deity yoga, and you purify. And so you participate in the relative situation we find ourselves in. But the fundamental truth is everything is already pure from beginning of time. Everything is already pure. If you realize that, you're no longer at war with anything. The most horrible, difficult thing, your understanding completely penetrates through everything. It's a Buddhist teaching of totality, which is as close as I come to using positive words about this. I usually teach in a negative way, not to. But positively, it's totality. There isn't anything that's outside of this. There is the inside and outside are the makeshift terms of ego to try to get ahead. It's inside, outside, inside, outside. Those create more spiritual materialism. More trying to get ahead, trying to use the spiritual path to become more and more holy, more pure, more liberated, and try to make it happen without looking at what it actually is that's happening. Nothing sleeps anywhere. It just looks like it does. Everything is always awake. Everywhere you look, everything is awake all the time. And of course, time is beside the point. That's why you can say that. More? Good question.
Well, what is why are these reference points so sternly outlined in Buddha Dharma?
Well, there's several things. One is the time in which those things were taught was a time when a lot of people were illiterate, so they had to have some kind of a structure to actually make it a teaching. So you had something you could study conceptually, so you could work with it. So that's one area you could look at for a reason. And the other one is for us to actually be able to talk about this, for people to just meditate and not have some way of working with the conceptual mind, with the sixth, seventh, and eighth consciousness, what we're calling that, to work with the thinking mind that grasps at some things and rejects other things and shuts down on other things. We need some way of working with that along with the awareness practice. So it seems to take more than just, and it also takes a sangha, it seems. Not always, there are spontaneous realizers. You know, Ramana Maharshi awoke in 1880 without much happening other than he was playing soccer. But that has to do with karma, and it's rare. It's just a way of talking about it. Just you come to book study and we take material that, and one of the feelings that you have when we study is we don't get it. But that's not the point. It's not about getting it so you can go on to the next material. It's about working with that material. The most important thing about studying this material together is Sangha. The community of people who are trying to understand this is so important, and it's overlooked in most traditions these days, especially because people don't live in monasteries. Very important community. Yes.
2 questions. One from
Yes.
Patrick in Seattle asks, if everything is already pure, why bother meditate or do any practices?
So it has to be realized. And if you know, I would say that if you're saying this, then well, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should just do whatever you want to do. I'm not here to sell you on anything. So, but if you're suffering, this is a way of working with suffering. If people around you are suffering, this is a way of working with it, a way of actually, instead of taking medications, instead of going to therapists, instead of talking to your psychiatrist or taking the advice of your life coach, you know, to actually connect yourself with a teaching that goes back 2,500 years, that has no sales pitch, just promises nothing. Anytime you hear anyone teaching the Buddha Dharma, they're promising you anything, this is not the Buddha's Dharma. The Buddha's Dharma respects everyone where they're at. I'm not saying that some cultural situations don't arise where they start ordering people around, telling people what to do and what's right and what's wrong. That happens. But you know, you could say the purity is not, it's not a relative purity. It's complete, it's absolute. It's Dharmakaya. So the absolute form of it, it doesn't have any polarity to it. Go ahead.
A question from Anna Marie out in Brooklyn, New York.
Yes.
She asks, how is Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's students giving up on him by offering him alcohol related to Rinpoche giving up on himself?
Rinpoche didn't have any self to give up on. So Rinpoche was totally at the service of his students. He was a bodhisattva. I knew him, so that's what he was. And so the way I'm talking about it is not to condemn them. It's not a criticism of his students. His students loved him. They would do anything for him. If I had been there in 1987 and he asked for some sake, I probably would have run and got it for him. But I'm just saying, things are dependently arisen, and nothing is separate from anything else. So it's a very interesting area to look at. No one killed him, I'm not accusing him, but it's a very interesting area how devotion to the teacher can get kind of out of hand sometimes. That's not going to happen here.
Maybe by some.
Huh?
Perhaps by some.
I didn't get any oatmeal cookies tonight. I didn't see anybody. Wait, somebody did offer me some. Didn't you offer me some?
You were supposed to pass them on.
That's the way it looked. It didn't look like an offer. It looked like, here's the box.
You passed on the
Pass it.
chocolate though, so no.
Well, that's true. Any further questions before we close? JD.
It's not a question, I just want to test, we're talking about the, meditation covering up.
Yes.
The power of this practice. I've been off, 2 years on antidepressants and
Yeah.
off the tranquilizers for a year
Okay, good.
while using,
Meditate.
the chikuntaza and studying.
Okay.
I feel happier now and more stable, emotionally,
Good.
through this, more holistic.
Good. Well, it's good to hear that. I mean, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm
Not
not
right.
saying it's for everybody,
Yeah.
but for me, it's,
Yeah, that's
it's
good to
really
hear.
been a benefit.
Very good. Thank you so much, JD. Very good. Thank you. Thank you all.
So let's stand and dedicate the merit in the back of your red chant books. Once again, I'd like to remind everybody about this Saturday's all day. Also, we have donation boxes in the hallway. Please, if you value these teachings, help support us. We also accept online payments.
May the
Miracles penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jio San Shi Shihu Shizon Musa Moko Sa Moko Horomi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions of the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering of going with